Hi all, Troy Hand from TRT Australia. Today I'll be taking you through the Operator Familiarisation Training of the TIDD PC28. Please refer all information that I'll talk about today back to the Operator's Manual. Thank you. Before carrying out your pre-start checks, please make sure that you electrically isolate the machine by the start isolator and the battery isolator. It's also good practice to make sure that your machine is wheel chocked before carrying out your pre-start checks. Now that we've moved around to the rear of the machine, I like to have a good visual inspection of the whole rear end. Having a look for any damage for our tail lights, stop lights, indicators. Having a look in our counterweight cylinders for any leaks. Checking our chains, safety catches, latches. Ensure that there's no damage to the cooling package of the machine. Check for any damage for our rotary light, camera, work light. And yeah, I also get under there and make sure that the spare wheel is secure. Have a quick look underneath the machine to make sure there's no oil or anything present. Now we've moved around to the left-hand rear of the machine. Things that should be checked are things like your muffler for any cracks, damage or leakage. Air intake box should be checked for any cracks, damage, loose clamps. Also checking your pre-cleaner bowl for any build-up of dust. Moving on to the wheels, having a good look around, visual check of your rims, no damage to any of the sidewalls of the tyres. Then moving on to the wheel nuts, making sure your wheel nuts are correct tension, checking your rims for any damage. Also, manufacturer's pressure for the TIDD PC28 is 130 psi for the tyre pressures. Now that we've moved around to the left-hand side articulation area of the TIDD PC28, things to check is your hydraulic oil level. The oil level is checked when the crane is configured for road travel. The hydraulic system is pressurised for the TIDD PC28. There is a valve at the rear here that should be released for when working on the hydraulic system. Also, check for any leaks or damage to the hydraulic return filter. Now moving on to the auto grease system, ensuring that the grease level is in the correct parameters between max and low. Obviously, if it's below low, we need to fill this up at this point. No damage, no leaks, all wiring is secure. Also, at this point, take notice of the warning signs in the articulation area. This is the other reason why we do isolation lock before carrying out a pre-start check. At this point, I like to check our steering cylinders for any damage or leaks. Steering pins and nuts are nice and tight. Articulation shaft, uni joints and uni caps are tight. Also, center pivot. I like to check that the center pivot retainer plates are secured, making sure our center pivot pin nut is tight and the locking ring is secured. Next thing that should be done when carrying out your pre-start is draining your air tanks daily. There's 2 points on the left-hand side articulation area and one on the right-hand rear of the crane. This is one of 3 emergency e-stops. This is the left-hand side emergency e-stop. We have one on the right-hand side and one in the cabin. Moving on to the left-hand front side of the TIDD PC28. Visual checks that should be carried out. Any valving or any leaks around the luff cylinder. Any hydraulic leaks on the upper turret. Making sure our articulation bar has been locked off and in place and clips are fitted. Our mirrors are tight and adjusted correctly. Checking our tyre condition, our tread depth, and no damage to the tyres. Visually checking our wheel nuts, rims. Finally checking our pressures are set at the correct pressure of 130 psi. Moving around to the front of the TIDD PC28. First thing I like to do is just stand back and have a good look at the front. Looking for any damage. I'll move around to my indicators, headlights, high beams for any damage. Checking security of my spreader bar. Everything is secure, pins are secure, and legibility of the plaque. Moving on to the counterweight. Making sure secured, pins are fitted, clips are fitted and restrained. Also checking your doors and hinges for any damage. Checking your luff cylinder for any leaks and any damage to the rod. There are 2 points on the luff cylinder that require greasing. Top luff cylinder pin, bottom luff cylinder pin, which is located at the bottom of the cylinder. And then I just move around underneath, having a look at my tyre wear and for any oil that may be on the ground. Moving around to the driver's side of the TIDD PC28, things that should be checked. Mirror mounts are tight and secure, mirrors are adjusted correctly. Moving around to your tyres, making sure your tread depth is correct, any damage to your tyre, and checking your rim for any damage, and visual check your wheel nuts are set correctly. Tyre pressure is set to 130 psi. Making sure the security of your dry sling box, security of your doors, and any damage to any of your glass around the machine. Now we're at the right hand side articulation area of the TIDD PC28. This is where you'll find emergency e-stop located externally for the right hand side and bridging key, which we'll talk about later in this session. At this point, I like to check my security, my hoses through the articulation joint. I like to check my articulation shaft. I'll get another better angle of this on the right hand side. I check my steering cylinders for any damage or leaks and security of my steering pin nuts. Also, while in this area, please take note of the warning decals. I also at this point have a look at for any damage that may have occurred to any of the access steps to the rear body and security of the handrail. Now we're going to check the transfer case area. Under the cover, you'll find the transfer case. Down in front of the transfer case is where you'll find the oil level dipstick. I check for any oil leaks from any of the shaft seals, mounting, rubbers for the transfer case. I check the drive shafts for any damage of the uni joints, tension of any of the caps and nuts, and in general, have a good look around for any oil leaks that could be present. Now we're at the right hand side rear of the TIDD PC28. This is where you'll find the location of the diesel fill point and cap. We're going to do the same checks that we've done on the last 3 points with the tyres. We're going to check our tread depth, we're going to check our tyre condition, our tyre pressures, wheel nut tension and rim condition. This is where you'll find our jump start receptacle beside our battery isolator and start isolator. This is our hydraulic controls for our counterweight, which we'll talk about later in this session. And last but not least, our last air tank drain valve that's located at the right hand rear. And that's it for ground level checks. Now we can move up to the engine compartment. Now we're going to continue our pre-start on the engine and transmission of the TIDD PC28. Let's start by opening the bonnet. The radiator cap is located on top of the cooling package, equipped with the pressure relief valve. Please only check the radiator when it is cold. From there, I checked my shrouds, security of the radiator, hoses, clamps, and no sign of any visual leaks from the radiator. I move on to my intercooler hoses, checking for any damage, tension, tightness in these areas. Checking my fan blades for any damage, checking my fan belt for any damage, security, checking my fuel lines for any fuel leaks in this area. Also, on the right hand side of the engine is where you'll find the dipstick for the engine oil level. Moving on to the compressor, making sure compressor lines are tight and no visual leaks in this area. Moving on to a hydraulic pump and mounting, making sure there's no visual oil leaks, security of all bolts and nuts, checking mounting points, all secured, and any other hydraulic leaks in this area. Moving on to the transmission. The transmission fill point and dipstick is located on the left-hand side, and the transmission oil level must be checked with the engine running. Checking then for any exhaust leaks at this point, and then just a general overview of the engine for any oil leaks in general. Our battery box is located at the rear of the deck. Now we're going to do the inspection of the boom head. I start with the rhino hook and latch for operation. Visual inspection of the rhino hook itself. I move on to the pins for the rhino hook and clips are fitted and secured. We check the ATB for operation, and then also the chain and ATB bob weight is fitted and secured. From there, I'll move on to the winch rope. From here you can have a better look at the winch rope around the head sheaves, having a look at the full block sheaves, having a look at the head sheaves, and then moving on to the dead end of the rope with the pin fitted and clip secure. Whilst I'm in this area, I'll also check the payout cable for any damage and also any of the wiring up in and around this area. It's always a good idea to have a good look around the condition of your boom head for any damage, and also your full block, checking all your pins are secured, and then also on top your winch diverter sheave, having another look at that, making sure there's no physical damage in this area. Now we're going to check the rear of the boom and the winch. From here, I like to check my telescoping hoses, my ropes, my cylinders and any valves for any hydraulic oil leaks. Lock nuts have been applied to extension ropes and are tight. Security of the extension ropes, the lay of our winch rope, and lubrication of our winch diverter shaft sheave and condition. From here, you can take a good look at the winch rope for any signs of damage. The oil level for the winch is found on the left-hand side. And finally, just having a good look on top of the boom, making sure the winch rope is laying correctly. We've now finished the pre-start inspection. I'm now going to hand you over to Cameron, who's going to take you over the cabin controls on the TIDD PC28.
So before starting the crane, we'll go through a few of the cabin features. The crane is fitted with 2 air seats, front and rear, with adjustable up and down for front and rear. There is an on-off switch on the left-hand side to dump air for easy getting in and out of the crane. Up to our left, we have the aircon controls and heater controls. Behind that, we have the interior light with a 2-position switch, 1 for on and 2 for when the door is open. To the rear of that, we have the emergency hammer to break the glass in case of emergency. Down to our left, we have FM radio with Bluetooth. We have ducted aircon throughout the cab, with one of these being the vents, another one on the front of the dash, one on this side, and one in the rear for the dogman. We have the multi-function joystick for the crane operation, which we'll go through soon. We have a monitor for the winch camera and reverse camera. We have the LMI, which we'll go through soon, for the load system and travel. The gearbox controls for the Allison automatic. Our ignition key. Our multi-function stalk for indicators, wipers and horn. On the left-hand side of the steering column, we have a lever. If you push it away from you, you can adjust the column up and down. And if you pull it towards yourself, you can telescope in or out. Above us here, we have, for high boom angle operation, a sun flap that you can push back so you can see high up. Down here to our right, we have the fire extinguisher mounted in case of emergency. So on the right hand side of the dashboard, we have 6 switches. Starting at the top left, we have high low range switch, 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive switch, front diff lock, override key, which is called the deadlock key, ATB override, and holding brake. On the left hand side of the dashboard, we have 10 switches. Starting at the top left, we have engine brake, which is a 2-stage switch. So one is constant throttle valve in the engine, and the second position is for exhaust flap, and both on together. Next one over is the on-off switch for the cruise control. The one next to it is to go faster or slower in cruise control, set and reset. The one next to that is your boom work light and rear work light. The next one is your rotary lights, one at the rear of the crane and one on the boom. Down to the bottom row, we have a crane travel switch. Next one over is a suspension manual adjustment switch, which is mainly used for maintenance. The next one is the main auto leveling suspension switch. The next one along is a 2-position switch for parkers and headlights. And the next one over is for hazard lights. On the very left of the dash, we have the e-stop switch and the parking brake switch. So in the footwell, you have your accelerator and your brake and a footrest on the left. So the joystick for the crane functions, you have a dead man switch on the front, which you must hold to do any function. The joystick must be in the neutral position before activating the dead man. The button on the left, the red button, is your high-speed winch. The rocker switch to the right of that is your tally in and out. Forward activation of the joystick will give you winch down. Rearward activation will give you hoist up. Joystick away from you will be luff up, and towards you will be luff down. So now we've removed the start isolation, we can now start the crane. With the ignition switch, you turn the ignition switch on and wait for the TIDD logo to come up on the screen, and then it's okay to start. While the Robway is booting up, it will do a bulb check, which is on the screen now, with LMI starting. So now the Robway is fully booted. We are in the travel screen for travel mode. So showing on the screen at the moment, on the left hand side, we have the RPM with two smaller gauges showing front and rear air tanks pressures. The right hand dial, or the right hand gauge, is your speedo, with the two smaller gauges showing, the one on the left a fuel percentage and the one on the right an engine temperature, with a total odometer in the bottom right hand side, and on the left hand side is engine hours, with the time down the bottom. At the bottom left of the screen we have a spanner, which will change to red if there is an active error. Next to that it is showing us 2H, which is indicating we're in two-wheel drive high range, and the icon next to that is showing that we're in two-wheel drive and our diff lock is not engaged. So if we are to go into low range by activating the low range switch, the 2H has now changed to 2L, indicating we're in two-wheel drive low range. And if we activate the switch next to that, the four-wheel drive switch, and just bump it into gear and back out, it is now indicating we're in four-wheel drive low range. The switch next to that, the front diff lock, we switch it on, it indicates the next icon that the front diff lock is engaged. We switch off the diff lock, we can stay in four-wheel drive and go back to high range. So now we're in four-wheel drive high range, or we can go back to two-wheel drive high range. If the error is present and you push on the spanner button, you'll get three options on the screen of where the fault is in the LMI, the controls, or the engine and trans. To see what is active, use the scroll button to go up to push the view, and the error will be listed on the screen. And push escape to return back to the travel page. Other icons that come up on the screen while in travel mode: indicators, so if you want to travel in the daytime with your headlights on, activate the headlights, which automatically dulls the screen for nighttime use. To re-engage the daytime screen, push the rotary encoder 3 times, and it's back to daytime with headlights on. So now we're going to go into crane mode to tally the boom all the way out to do a boom inspection. So first of all, we're going to activate the crane mode switch on the left hand switch panel, which will bring up our crane operating screen, and we'll get the crane set up initially, wanting us to select where our counterweight is and what duty we're in. So you can use the cycle button to cycle between them. We can't get to the counterweight option at the moment because the counterweight is on the front, so it will not let us select counterweight on rear due to proxy switches. So running through the duties, duty 1 in the description is main hoist, duty 2 is rhino hook, duty 3 is 25 ton lifting tele boom lug 1, duty 6 is the 28 ton lifting lug, duty 7 is your man basket, duty 8 is 1.9 metre fly jib at 0 degree offset, duty 9 is at 20 degree offset, duty 10 is at 40 degree offset. So we'll be selecting duty 1 at the moment to tally the boom all the way out for the inspection, which is select, confirm duty, And now we have to select parts of line that the hook block is reeved to. We are currently at 6, but if this was incorrect, you could select and scroll through the options of how you've reeved the crane. So we will select 6 parts, confirm. So now we're going to apply the dead man on the joystick. We'll winch down to go away from the 2-block switch, and now we will tally out. As we are tallying, the first 2 sections come out together and the winch rope is compensated, so you don't need to adjust the winch rope length. But once the first 2 come all the way out and it switches over to the 3rd, then you have to winch down. If you don't winch down on the 3rd section, it will activate the 2-block switch and it will cut out, tally out. As shown here, I won't winch down. Now we have activated the 2-block. So we'll winch down and continue tallying out the last section while applying the winch down function. You can see total boom length is going out, and once we get to full boom length of 18.65 meters, we'll winch back up so we get maximum hook height, and now we'll lower the boom closer to the ground for a visual inspection. So now we can switch off the crane and go do a visual inspection of the boom. So now the boom's fully extended, we can do our inspection. So now we've finished our boom inspection, we can tally back in and commence crane operation. So now we're going to test the emergency steer circuit on a PC28. It cannot be tested statically, as it is a constant driven gear pump off the transfer case. So the vehicle has to be moving for the pump to work. So we'll, in a controlled environment, we're going to release the park brake with our foot applied on the brake, select drive, which will indicate on the monitor that we've selected drive and we're currently in first gear. We're going to aim to get to 20 kilometers an hour and activate the emergency stop, which will fail the engine and we'll lose main pump pressure and the emergency steer pump will take over. So now we've got to our 20 kilometers an hour. I'll activate the emergency stop. Engine is shut down, and as you can see, we can still steer off the road into a safe position and come to a stop with full function of steering. Once you've stopped, apply your park brake, select neutral on the gear selector and release your emergency stop switch. In the situation where the cabin controls have failed and a load needs to be lowered to the ground and the crane packed up, we remove the cover off the deck here to access the main control valve where the emergency manual overrides can be activated. We'll now demonstrate how to do this. So this is the location of the main control valve block, and this is the emergency handle to actuate them. By unbolting it and removing it, now we have the handle to actuate the functions. So now the handle is on the winch valve here. This is the luff valve, this is the tally valve, and this is for suspension. So now we'll activate the winch. So now we're going to operate the luff cylinder. And now operating the tally cylinder. So as shown earlier, the crane will motion cut you at 100% capacity. If further is needed, the deadlock switch on the dash can be activated to achieve 110%. Any further activation above 110 requires the bridging key to be activated. So when activating the bridging key, this disables all safety features on the crane. You should follow your company procedures, as this can cause damage and injury. So now we're going to go through the crane operation. So to start with, we're going to activate the crane switch. Once the crane switch is on, you'll feel the crane move a little bit in the suspension and lock out. And now it's prompted us with the crane setup page. So currently we have the counterweight on the front, so we can't go up and select where the counterweight is due to the proxy switch. So duty 1 is main hoist, which we will be lifting on. So we select with the main button, confirm duty, and now it's asking for parts align. Currently we are reeved to 4 parts, but if this is incorrect, you can cycle up and change to what the crane is reeved to. So we'll select 4 parts, confirm. So now we're in the crane operating screen. We can see at the top right hand corner it's telling us that we are in duty 1. Next one down showing us tip height. Next one is the radius. Next one is the boom length, and then boom angle. On the left hand side it's showing 4 parts of rope, showing us our front axle weight, our rear axle weight, the current RPM of the engine, and the current fuel percentage. The 2-wheel drive high icon is lit. We can lift in crane mode in low range or high range, depending on the site conditions. In either high or low range, the crane is speed limited to 10 kilometers an hour. So in the center up the top, it's showing that we are articulated 4 degrees to the left, and our current side slope is 0.2 of a degree. The crane will articulate either side of center to 44 degrees and has charts to lift on a side slope up to 8 degrees, derating every 1 degree of side slope, which we'll demonstrate later. In the center of the screen, it's showing that we're good for 10.6 tonne, and we currently have 220 kilos of fall block on the crane. with a bar graph to indicate. And in the right hand lower corner, it's showing we're in low speed winch. So now we will start operation and boom up to around 55 degrees to get the hook block out of the locker. You're good, Dick? You good? All right. So now the hook's in position, Troy's going to put the pin through and the safety latch on. So now we're going to check the function of the 2-block switch. So we'll winch up into the switch and we'll get an audible and visible alarm on the screen saying 2 blocks. The 2-block alarm will only be present, even in the 2-block condition, it will only be present if you try and winch up or tally out. So now we know the 2-block is working, we can carry on. So now we're going to demonstrate the 2 different load charts of the crane. So as you can see on the Robway screen, the 2 different sliders. One is at 90% and one is, the small one on the inside, is around further, up near 100%. So with the holding brake on, the crane achieves 75% chart, and with the holding brake off is on 66% pick and carry chart. So if we tally this load out a little bit more until the 66% chart goes over 100%, so now we can see our 66% chart is up over 110%. So if we were to release the holding brake now to drive off, we would be in an overloaded condition. So the Robway is trying to tell you to tally back in and bring your load closer until your safe working load is under 100% on the 66% chart to drive off. If I turn off the holding brake now, you will see the overload condition. So we will reapply the holding brake, tally the load back closer, reduce our radius until the 66% chart comes under 100%. And now we are safe to release the holding brake and drive off. So now we're going to demonstrate Slew Safe. As you can currently see, we've got 2.7 tonne on the hook and we're good for 4.38 tonne. So as I articulate to the left and the chart becomes to 100%, the Slew Safe will activate and restrict the steering in the unsafe direction. Now the steering has gone heavy. As hard as I pull on it, it's still restricted, but the screen is telling me down the bottom that I'm at 106% and I'm overloaded and it's limit steering to the left. Now if I return to the right, it is full speed steering back in the safe direction. So now we're going to demonstrate the dynamic side slope chart duration. Currently we're at 0.7 degrees to the right and we're good for 3.72 tonne. I'm going to slowly drive into the side slope and you'll see the side slope increase and the safe working load decrease at every degree of side slope. And as you can see, at 6.7 degrees of side slope, we are now good for 2.6 tonne. So now we're going to move on to removing the counterweight off the front of the crane. You want to be boomed up to about 50 degrees and have about 2.7 tonne on the hook. Troy's now removing the counterweight lock pins, and now we'll proceed to winch down slowly. Now the counterweight's on the ground, we're going to unhook it and we'll reverse up to it and put it on the rear. So now we're going to back up onto the counterweight and follow our dogman's instructions. Select neutral and apply the park brake. So now the counterweight is on the rear. The Robway has prompted us to select our duty. So now we can go up and select our counterweight and select rear counterweight. And duty 1 is now duty 101 because of rear counterweight on the main hoist. So we'll confirm duty. We still have 4 parts of rope. Confirm. Now you can see on the screen showing the counterweight that we have a rear counterweight. So when the counterweight is on the rear of the machine, the spreader bar can be refitted to the front of the crane. Now we're going to remove the counterweight from the rear of the crane. So we apply neutral in the gearbox and apply the park brake and watch our dogman in the rear view monitor. So now we're going to refit the counterweight to the front of the crane. So ensure the park brake is on and you're on reasonably level ground with your boom retracted at about 50 degrees boom angle at about 1.2 meters of radius. And we'll slowly winch up, watching our dogman guided onto the lugs. So now the counterweight is secure, we're going to winch down and store the hook back in the locker box. At about 55 degrees and 0.7 of a meter radius to restore the hook. now we're going to store the fall block for road travel. It can be stored in the reverse position of the boom head. So now it has 2 blocks, so we hit the 2 block override until the override ATB comes up on the screen, and we winch up until the hook is on the boom, release the ATB override and boom down to around 5 degrees for road travel. So now we're going to go into travel mode. A few things to check before going in is that the boom is fully retracted, the boom angle is under 10 degrees, the holding brake is on. When we are in travel mode, there will be a warning for suspension not level, which we'll show shortly. To level the suspension, the park brake has to be released. So that is why the holding brake is left on, transitioning from crane mode to travel mode, which we'll do now. So the warning on the screen is saying suspension not level. The icon that is flashing is referring to the button we need to hold to level the suspension. As you can see, the park brake is on, so we will release the park brake. And you can see in the top left corner the holding brake is still on. The holding brake will stay on coming from crane mode to travel mode, but once in travel mode, if it is released, it can't be reactivated. So now we will hold down the auto level button. You will see the crane move and hold the button until the icon on the screen disappears. So now the level warning has gone. We are right in travel mode. We can release our holding brake with our foot applied to the brake. And currently we are still in 2-wheel drive low range, so we can activate high range. And now the crane is good to drive off. So now we're going to load the crane onto a low loader for transport. So we're going to release, put our foot on the foot brake, release the park brake. And as you can see on the screen, we're in 2-wheel drive high range, so we want to go to 4-wheel drive low range. So we'll activate low range, which it hasn't gone in, so you may just have to bump it into gear so the gears line up. Now we're in 2-wheel drive low range. We want to select 4-wheel drive. Once again, we'll just bump it into gear. And now 4-wheel drive low range is selected on the screen. We're currently in first gear, so we're going to approach the low loader with a spotter on the back of the truck and go up straight and slow. So now we're on the low loader for transport. We want to secure the vehicle, so we'll select neutral on the gear selector. With the park brake still released, we will select the suspension down button to fully lower the suspension. Which is all the way down. We'll apply the handbrake and we'll confirm that our boom is no higher than 0 degrees and the boom is fully retracted and the fall block is in the 2 blocked position. Now we can switch off the crane and go around and fit our articulation lock and turn off the isolators. So now we've fitted our articulating lock bar, we just need to fit our 2 securing clips. And now we can move on to our crane tie down points.
This concludes the familiarisation and safe operation of the TIDD PC28. All procedures shown in this video are to be done in accordance with the operator's manual and your company policies and procedures.